Broadcasting from the Newsradio 102.9 KARN Radio Center and Studio 1B, it is Gwatney Unplugged with Scott Romine.
Hey, welcome to Gwatney Unplugged. Scott Romine here, and just it's fantastic Saturday here in Arkansas, and very excited to talk to our first guest. We're going to talk about my favorite sport on the show today. We've got Shawn Maves. He's on the line from Canada. He's a former bodybuilder who won Mr. Ontario. He writes for bodybuilding.com. That's one of the top websites out there. Faith and Fitness magazine, and he co-hosts a TV show. How are you, Shawn?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on the show today.
Just excited to have you. Tell me about the TV show. Do you
talk? Go ahead.
You talk bodybuilding, I guess?
No, this is a live call-in show. I occasionally co-host up here in Canada, Canada-wide on Yes TV stations. What it is we take calls late in the evening to some of the lost and hurting people out there. You know, we're living in a hurting world. There's a lot of people going through depression and worry and anxiety. We try to minister to them with the gospel of Jesus Christ, and that's what it's all about.
That's fantastic. Tell me about when you first got into bodybuilding. What sparked your interest?
Yeah, you know what? Most guys who get into the sport know exactly what I'm going to say. You get into this sport because you get inspired what you see in the magazines. And I was pretty naive back in my late teens, and I believed in the myth that you could actually look like your hero without taking the steroids. And I was inspired by pictures of Lee Haney, Tom Platz, Mike Quinn, Shawn Maves, some of these guys in the 80s. And I looked back in the magazines. I seen Steve Reeves back in the golden era, and some of those guys inspire me. And I thought, as a young teenager, that the look of Steve Reeves and Frank Zane was achievable. That was one of the reasons I got into sport, because nobody gets into a sport believing they'll fail. I thought I could win, so that's why I got into it.
I remember Shawn Maves. You mentioned Shawn Maves. He's been on the show here before and comes to Arkansas. Lee Haney came and guest posed in Little Rock one time. And, you know, to look at the guy in person, he was so far beyond the best of the best in this state. It was really kind of mesmerizing. I mean, yeah, I guess you just can't get there naturally, but the guy was a freak. I mean, unbelievable. What about wrestling? Those guys looked like bodybuilders, I guess, at least when you and I were growing up, they did.
Yeah, you know what? The sport changed in the late 80s. You'll notice that some of the guys coming up the ranks in wrestling, they started to look like bodybuilders because they actually were. Hulk Hogan was a former bodybuilder. Triple H won Mr. Teenage New Hampshire in 1988. That was the year before I won Mr. Ontario in the heavyweight class. John Cena, competitive bodybuilder. Ric Flair is a former strongman. I met him. Some of those guys used to pass through my gym. And the guy that I really looked up to back in the day was Jim Hellwig, former Mr. Georgia, who went on. His stage name was the Ultimate Warrior. If you're a wrestling fan, everybody knows that name. And that was the kind of physique that I was looking to achieve. And Lex Luger has an interesting story. He was on WDCX 99.5. A station that I've been on 3 or 4 times, and he looked like a bodybuilder too.
I believe Ultimate Warrior teamed up with Macho Man there for a while, the Ultimate Maniacs or something to that effect. I watched all this stuff. It was just great. The 80s were a great time with a lot of creative things. A lot of the stuff that they do today is just kind of ripping off what was new to you and I in the 80s, in my opinion.
Yeah,
you know. Is there such thing as a pro card? I mean, you won the Mr. Ontario. Does that not qualify you to bigger and better things?
Yeah, the Ontario Bodybuilding Championships was a qualifier for the Nationals up here in Canada, Mr. Canada. Now, I didn't go to the Nationals. I quit the sport at a young age, 24. People ask me about that. Maybe we'll get into all the details of that. But you see, a lot of these guys who get the pro card, there's a bit of a myth behind it. A lot of people think that once you become a pro, you're going to make it big in the industry. That's not true. A lot of these guys end up just becoming Instagram stars. Very few get really advertising contracts, but a lot of the guys just end up being online coaches and trainers and gym owners and stuff like that, which is fine. I mean, at the end of the day, here's the thing. You want to be helping society. You want to be helping others reaching fitness goals. And a lot of the guys find it actually ironically more satisfying to help others than to just helping themselves. In other words, trying to glorify yourself on the stage. A lot of people find, it's not that satisfying at the end of the day.
I got to ask you, this is a silly question. Is a pro card a real card? Is it a physical thing? You're a pro now, and here it is? Or is your just name on a list somewhere and you can compete in bigger events?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm sure there's probably a physical card. Again, I was one step away from winning it. But I can tell you this. I was glad I got out of the sport, and I'm very happy to be where I'm at now. You know what? God always has something better for you. And I gave up those dreams years ago, and now I'm so happy to be part of this television ministry on occasion up here in Canada. I do some behind-the-scenes stuff, too. I write for Faith and Fitness magazine. You know, God always has something better. He really does.
I got to ask you, Shawn, these competitions like you entered and you were winning and all of that, would the public be shocked at maybe how few of them actually test for drugs, or maybe how many of them do test for drugs? How would you know?
Yeah, well, I could tell you this. The Ontario Bodybuilding Champions, they never tested. I wasn't sure when I went in. I actually quit. I was actually a user of steroids for off and on for 2.5 years. I actually quit taking steroids 3 years before the contest for a number of reasons. One of them was I wasn't sure exactly if they're going to test or not. They never did. As it turns out, a lot of these shows don't test. You have to go to a federation like the World Natural Bodybuilding Federation, where they really do some serious testing. I know in 1993 they tested all the guys at the Nationals up here in Canada, and all the class winners tested positive, and they did one random, and he tested positive also. So I mean, let's face it, there's drugs in all sport. I'm not just going to pick on bodybuilding. We're going to get into it later. The sport, there's drugs in all sports today. It's a sad reality.
Do they even test for the big shows anymore, like the Mr. Olympias and the Mr. Universe? Is that even a thing?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not qualified to really speak on that. Again, I just what I said earlier.
Hard to know.
I know.
Yeah,
it's really hard to know. It's I don't think they do, but I could be wrong on that.
Hey, I wanted to ask you about something, because I've always heard that somebody that was a pro bodybuilder, or really a bodybuilder, may not necessarily be as physically strong as a person would assume that they are. Because if you look at a power lifter, they don't necessarily look like a bodybuilder, but they could be way stronger. What is the deal there?
Yeah, you're half right there. You know, most bodybuilders are very strong, but they're not as strong as powerlifters. I mean, everybody specializes in something, and we see the strongman contests also. Well, I can give you a couple examples. I used to train with former Mr. Canada, Jason Markovici. Him and I were training partners for a year, and Jason could bench press 525 pounds. I couldn't do that much. My max lift was 370. Now, I probably could have tested 400 maybe. I probably could have trained up to 400 or 425. It's hard to tell. But I was training for size and shape, not exactly to max out my bench press. But a lot of these guys are really strong. Eddie Robinson, former Mr. USA, could bench 500. Franco Columbu, he was one of the strongest bodybuilders out there back in the golden era. He could deadlift 775, squat 665, and he had a 525 bench. So those are good numbers.
Yeah, that was Arnold's training partner and his best friend, who sadly, I guess we lost about a year ago.
Yeah, sadly, Franco went on, and Arnold's still going strong, and he's still doing a number of things out there. And some of these guys in the golden era, actually, we're finding out, are living quite lengthy years. But there's a number of them who haven't. We'll probably get into that a little bit later.
Absolutely. Hey, we got to take a quick break. We're talking with Shawn Maves. He was Mr. Ontario. He's still Mr. Ontario to me. He writes for bodybuilding.com. We're talking about a great, very cool, fascinating sport, bodybuilding. And we'll be right back here on Gwatney Unplugged.
You're listening to Gwatney Unplugged on Newsradio 102.9 KARN with Scott Romine. Brought to you by Gwatney Automotive Group.